Okay. And I'm gonna pin you to so that yeah, there we go. All right. So Krista, take it away.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. And thanks everyone for having me. I'm really passionate about advocating alongside people with disabilities and training professionals on reframing how they approach supporting people with disabilities into more of an allyship role. So I want to share some information about something that we may have all struggled with at some point in our lives, which is loneliness, and talking about how the impact of ableism and stereotyping can make people feel more lonely in their day-to-day lives. So, with that, our agenda for today is we're going to talk about ableism, and we're going to explore some different frameworks like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is going to help us better understand how people, specifically with disabilities, might be expressing unmet needs through some behaviors. We're also going to talk about how ableist attitudes can impact someone's sense of belonging. And then we're going to wrap up by sharing some specific strategies for how to be an ally to people with to people with disabilities. So, before we really dive into some of these topics, I think it's really important that we highlight who this population is. So, data has shown that this people with disabilities represent the world's largest minority group. About 1 in 6 people worldwide have a disability, but in the US, the National Institutes of Health reports that up to 27% of people in the United States are disabled or identify as having a disability, which is about 1 in 4 people. And it's really important to note that people with disabilities often belong to multiply marginalized groups. So Native Americans and Alaskan Natives are more likely than any other racial and ethnic background to report having a disability. People from the LGBTQIA plus community are more likely to self-report having a disability compared to people that are not part of that community. And also rural residents are disproportionately affected by disabilities, with about 14% of them reporting that they experience one, which I thought was very interesting. I don't know about I don't know about you all if you're from rural communities, but North Dakota, we're considered a frontier state. So we see this a lot within the people that we work with through North Dakota. And, I think it's really important too that we mention that having a disability, it's like the only marginalized group that anybody could join at any part in their life, any part of their life. It could be you could become disabled because of aging, a car accident, or maybe even like a major health issue like a heart attack or having a stroke. So this is just one of those groups that anybody and everybody could possibly join. Also, COVID, like there's actually been a lot of research around the impacts of long COVID and how people are now identifying as having a disability because of their long COVID symptoms. So now that we kind of have an understanding of um, who the people with disabilities are and how much they're represented in our communities, let's talk about ableism. So ableism is the discrimination against and social prejudice against people with disabilities based on the belief that typical abilities are superior. So at its heart, it really is rooted in this assumption that disabled people require being fixed, and it really defines people by their disability. So, just like racism and sexism, ableism classifies an entire group of people as less than, and it includes some harmful stereotypes, misconceptions, and generalizations of people with disabilities. Alice Wong happens to be one of my favorite disability advocates, so there's some really wise words from her. And we will talk about some specific examples of what this looks like in practice. But before we jump into some of those specific examples, let's talk about where ableism can be found. And really, it can be found at the institutional level. So, when we're talking about ableism within the institutional level, this is baked into like policies, systems, and practices that shape like an entire sector, like education, healthcare, and employment. So, for example, like medical ableism in healthcare, it's often common for people to diagnose, treat, or fix disabilities. So this can lead to clinicians overlooking a patient's quality of life or assuming that there is no quality of life just because there is a disability there. Um, I've seen it so many times where people with intellectual disabilities, they're not part of the conversation because there's this assumption that they can't help with their own medical decisions. And I've also seen it too where they won't offer preventative care because there's this assumption that the person won't benefit or they just don't understand what it's for. We'll see ableism in educational settings when you see separate classrooms where students with disabilities have lower academic standards than other same age children, instead of promoting that teachers use inclusive practices or universal design for learning. Um, yeah, so that's really how we see ableism at the institutional level. We see it a lot at the interpersonal level when we see people making comments through social interactions and relationships. This can be with friends, family, coworkers, and strangers, honestly. So, one example of this that I've seen quite a bit in my career is like a parent insisting on some pretty intense therapies that are aimed at normalizing their child's behavior versus teaching the child more about like how do you make this part of your identity and just having autonomy throughout your life. I've seen some parents pursue some not very ethical treatments that aren't evidence based because they're really trying to cure the disability, and it all comes from it comes from a good place, but really I think the best thing that we could be doing for our children is teaching them how to accept and thrive, with their current identities. Um, Also, it's pretty wild. I usually do this presentation with a colleague of mine who has a disability. And one time we gave this presentation to a group of first responders and it went over really great. We were so proud of it. And at the end of the day, he was waiting for his ride back to the office and somebody came up and gave him $1. Just out of nowhere, guy was dressed, up to the nines because we were giving a professional presentation, and I honestly was so ashamed when he told me that because I was like, we literally just got done giving a presentation about ableism and then somebody gave you $1 for absolutely no reason. Like it's just mind-boggling to me and sad, honestly. Um, but finally, I do want to highlight that we can see ableism at the internal level. So this is when somebody consciously or unconsciously believes that the harmful messages that they hear about disabilities and they apply it to themselves. So somebody might push themselves to exhaustion because they're trying to pass as non-disabled. We see this a lot with the autistic community. It's called masking. So it's I'm doing whatever I can to just like get through this day and appear as normal as possible. And then by the end of the day, people will just crash because they're so exhausted from not being able to be themselves or be able to stim because it's, not normal. Um, and internalized ableism, it really affects self-worth, identity, and mental health because it's often reinforced by these interpersonal and institutional messages around us. So here's an example of some of the internalized ableism statements that people might be saying to themselves, like I shouldn't use a wheelchair because I can walk. I can't be disabled because I can do things that others can't. I'm useless. I'm a burden. And I shouldn't ask for accommodations. And like I said, my colleague who I usually do this presentation with has confirmed he has said every single one of these statements to himself multiple times throughout his life. So let's talk a little bit more about what ableism might look like in the interpersonal space, because I think that that's the most common one that most of us would run into. And I'm not going to read all of these, but I do want to highlight some of the ones that I've seen quite a lot through my lifetime in my career. So, saying to somebody that you don't look disabled or sick, and this really stems from this bias and assumption that someone has to have this visible disability to actually be disabled. And it's really damaging, especially for people that maybe have chronic illness, because they feel like they have to prove their disability. One of my friends from this program that I had just done, he had autism, and he said that there was so many people that would say, "You don't look autistic," and he's like, "Oh well, let me do the autism dance for you to prove that I'm autistic." And it's just so wild to me, how you have to almost like adopt this sense of humor in order to cope with everything that's being thrown at you, and people just constantly doubting you. Um, but anyway, another one that I've seen often is saying that somebody with a disability is inspirational for doing something just very simple, like having a career. And this really is stemming from low expectations of people with disabilities. So if you've never seen it before, I really recommend watching Stella Young's TED Talk. She coined this phrase called inspiration porn, which is the objectification of disabled people as inspirations to non-disabled people based on their life circumstances. So just to give you some context of what this looks like, this is a really popular image that has made its rounds on social media throughout the years. And this is the prime example of inspiration porn because it's meant to make people without disability say, oh, if these people can do it, then I can too. So at the end of this presentation, I do have a link to her TED Talk if you're interested in checking it out. It's about 15 minutes, which is why I didn't include it with this presentation. Finally, making comments like it must be nice to stay home or not work full time, saying that to somebody with a disability really dismisses the systemic discrimination that people face, especially when it comes to finding employment. Um, I remember listening to a disability advocate named Lydia XZ Brown talking about when COVID hit and everybody started working from home, it was just wild to the disability community because working remotely has been an accommodation that they've been asking for years. And they were always told, no, like that's too much, that's not reasonable, we can't do that. But the second that able-bodied people were needed those accommodations, it was like it was done overnight. And it was just a no-brainer that, of course, we would do something like this. So these are all just like I said, common things that are said to people often, and just I'm trying to help you kind of see the world in a different light, if that makes sense. So now that we really know, or we have an understanding of what ableism is, let's talk about where it stems from, because we live in just an ableist society, and so it's not necessarily a bad thing that we may have said and done some of these things, because this is all stemming from what we've been taught. Um, so I like to point out that just how you think about disability affects how you feel about it. And these viewpoints can be categorized into these three overarching models of disability: the moral, medical, and social models. And do want to highlight that there are more than this, but for the sake of simplicity, we'll just focus on these three for today. So when we're talking about the moral model, disability is really seen as having meaning about a person's character, their deeds, their thoughts, and karma. So from this perspective, disability carries a lot of shame and stigma, especially if the disability is seen as like a mark of wrongdoing, like this family was cursed because of something that had happened to them in the past. And I know here in America that this model may seem like it's archaic, but it's actually the most prevalent worldwide. And we often see it in our media here in the Western world, where disability is portrayed as evil. So when you think about any horror movie, most of the villains have some sort of disfigurement. But we also see it in our children's movies too, with like Captain Hook and Scar, who are literally named after their disabilities, and pretty much all of their motives are, around getting revenge for the people that either had them acquire that disability or maybe made fun of them for their disability. Um, Moving on to the medical model. So this views disability as like a direct result of abnormalities in the body or the mind, and it aims to cure it. It's really trying to get the system or function to as close to normal as possible. And the issues that we see within this model is that it suggests that people with specialized training are the experts in disabilities, and people with disabilities are kind of just expected to follow the advice of these experts and shouldn't question their judgment, even if the treatment might not be in best interest of them. I've seen this a lot actually with a lot of my advocacy friends, or the people that I advocate with through different self-advocacy groups. One gentleman uses a walker and it has wheels on it, but recently he tore his shoulder because he was putting too much strain on the walker, and he's really struggling with like whether he wants to use a wheelchair, like an electric wheelchair, because he's kind of had that internalized ableism of if I can walk, I need to walk. And it's just interesting that there was kind of these unintended consequences of, yes, you can walk, but now down the road you have shoulder surgery because of all of the strain that was used in order to allow you to walk with a walker, if that makes sense. So there's never really like an easy, like the world isn't black and white. I can't say that, if these people had used wheelchairs their whole life that, they'd be fine because we don't know for sure. But I've seen it so many times where doctors will just dismiss what people are thinking because, or what people are saying because, they're just, there's this assumption that they don't know what's best for them. So finally, let's talk about the social model of disability. I really love this model because it says that society is the primary cause of disability and the problem lies in society, not the individual. So it acknowledges that people are disabled by their social environments, like inaccessibility to their communities, discrimination, and oppression. So yeah, I really appreciate the social model of disability because it takes a step back and it calls out like where ableism is stemming from in those systemic structures that might be impacting and causing undue harm or unintentional harm. So I do want to have a discussion about how ableism may impact loneliness. But first, I want to give you some definitions and give you some time to reflect whether you've seen this through your work or experienced it in your personal life. So it's really important that we highlight that people can experience a lack of connection in different ways. So research often talks about this in terms of loneliness and social isolation, and they are related, but they're not the same thing. So social isolation is more about how many connections you have, like what is the number of connections that you have and how often do you interact and belong to these different social groups. Whereas loneliness, on the other hand, um, it's how you feel. It's like this painful sense of being disconnected from others, even if you do have a lot of people like in your social circle, but not feeling like you belong and you can actually reach out and ask that person for help. And so in 2023, Dr. Vivek Murthy, who was our Surgeon General at the time, released this really great advisory. Well, it's not really great, it's actually very depressing, but I'm glad that he called attention to this subject. But he talked about how we have an epidemic of loneliness and isolation here in America. And in that advisory, it talked about how people with disabilities and individuals with poor mental health are the most likely to experience loneliness. And it talked about how loneliness can actually impact our individual health and our longevity. It can be feeling lonely or reporting loneliness. It can increase the risk of premature death by 26 to 29%, which is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, which is just mind blowing to me. So the report found that loneliness increases the risk of heart disease, anxiety, depression, and dementia. So now that we have talked about all of these really fun, light topics, let's take a moment to reflect and have a little bit of a discussion. Like, have you seen ableism impact loneliness and make people feel like they don't belong in certain places? Whether that be through your work, I don't know exactly where everybody works in this. I usually do this presentation to social workers and human service professionals, but have you seen this in your personal life through family, friends, etc.?
Krista, before people answer, I don't know if everyone else is getting a lot of feedback, but your voice got, are others hearing that? No? Okay, so it
Oh,
was just on my computer. Your voice was really garbled. So,
Oh, goodness.
okay, yeah. So I'm glad it's just my computer. So, um, folks,
yeah.
anyone, have you seen
This is
ableism impact loneliness?
Steve Larson from Monticello, Minnesota, and I became a person with disabilities at 70 years old when I had a stroke, and so I had a social network before I had the stroke or whatever, but I've really had to work hard to maintain that, and certainly Zoom has helped me quite a bit. I'm not driving right now because I fell and injured my shoulder 10 months ago. And so I found that it would be easy to be really lonely, but I belong to several various groups, advocacy groups, volunteer groups, and I do a lot of Zoom meetings, not too much stuff in person, and that has worked for me. And so, but as far as examples of ableism, I'll just give one specific one. We like to eat at Culver's restaurant. And because I have my left arm is paralyzed, my right arm is injured, I can't get in and out of the store by myself, nor can people in a wheelchair because there's no push buttons or sliding doors to get in. And I've complained both to the local ones and to the national. And the national says it's up to the locals, and the locals say it's up to national. But they're building new stores, and they should automatically meet the ADA requirements. So just from a customer standpoint, you go into Culver's, most of the people are older, and the majority are. And yet you can't get into the store if you have a disability. So it's just it's something we all have to fight on a daily basis.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Steve-O. It seems really silly because I've been in the disability field for 17 years. I didn't work with a lot of people that had ambulatory disabilities. So I actually never realized like how few um, businesses actually have those automatic door openers. Like it was mind blowing to me how many don't have them. And I mean, it just seems like such a no brainer because it benefits everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's a perfect example of honestly ableism, and this kind of ties back to universal design, which is just when we design our community spaces, with everybody in mind, everybody benefits, because at some point, you could break an ankle and need a scooter. Like you would benefit from a curb cut at that point, or you walk into a business with a bunch of bags in your hand. It's nice to have a door open automatically for you. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
just benefit one group, it benefits everybody.
Exactly. And like you mentioned, you could be on a knee scooter, which I was in the past, and you wouldn't be able to get in many of those stores.
Yeah, and then it's like if you get into it, now you have to be able to navigate, making sure that
Mm-hmm.
the rows aren't too close to each other, the racks are too close to each other. Well, thank you so much for sharing. Does anybody else want to share? Feel free to put it in the chat if that's helpful. Otherwise, we can move on. So now that we have this understanding of ableism, let's talk about how we can maybe take a fresh look at how we understand loneliness by using Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this theory, it's based on this idea that humans have needs that kind of build on each other. And it starts with like basic needs like having food, safety, and then it moves up to like higher level needs that are harder to accomplish, like belonging, self-esteem, and finally like self-actualization. And there have been additions to this theory, but we're going to kind of start with the basics. One of the biggest criticisms is the pyramid shape makes it seem like all of these like lower level needs need to be met before like the higher psychological needs can be met, but that's not really true. Like we kind of fluctuate between all of these on a daily basis, if that makes sense. But a common issue that we see in the disability field is how do we support maladaptive or challenging behaviors? And the focus has always been on changing the behavior. So providing like positive reinforcements that will reduce the challenging behavior. So if somebody really likes to drink pop and we want them to stop um, skipping work, I've seen it so many times where they'll have these behavior plans where you have to go to work, 5 times a week, and then you get a pop at the end of the week. And so they're tying like things that people like to reduce the different behaviors. And I really think that we could be providing better support to not only people with disabilities, but our children, our colleagues, and whatever. If we kind of reframe our thinking from like, what is this function of this behavior to what need isn't being met here? So I like Maslow's framework. It gives us kind of this human-centered lens that can help us ask better, more empathetic questions. So like I said, instead of how do we stop this behavior, maybe what is this person trying to communicate now? And how are they trying to communicate that they don't feel like they belong? And I found this video that can explain this way better than I can. So we'll go ahead and take a moment to watch this. Oh, and of course
Nuts.com
there's
is a
an ad.
snacking utopia. We have supplier relationships from all over the world. I actually don't speak.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a motivational theory in psychology comprising a 5-tier model of human needs. The 5-step pyramid model proposes that base needs must be met before higher needs can be tackled. If a base need is not met, an individual's drive, desire, and motivation will be to meet that base need, not a higher need. Let's look at each need in order. Then later in the video, I'll show you exactly what this hierarchy means for motivation and self-development. The base level on the hierarchy is physiological needs. This level encompasses all the needs that are fundamental to human survival. Without these, the human body cannot function properly and may eventually deteriorate. Examples of physiological needs include air, food, water, warmth, sleep, and clothing. These are the most primal needs and take precedence over all other levels of needs. Once an individual's physiological needs are met, the second level of Maslow's hierarchy comes into focus: safety needs. These needs relate to the desire for security and stability in one's environment. This includes not just physical safety, but also financial and emotional safety. Examples are security of employment, health, and personal property. The third level on Maslow's hierarchy is love and belongingness needs. Humans have an inherent desire for interpersonal relationships and a sense of belonging. This level emphasizes the importance of friendship, intimacy, trust, and acceptance, receiving and giving affection and love, and being a part of various groups such as family, friends, and colleagues. The fourth level is esteem needs. This revolves around the need for respect and recognition from others, as well as self-respect and a sense of accomplishment. There are two types of esteem needs: the need for the respect of others and the need for self-respect. Examples of respect from others include recognition, attention, and appreciation. Examples of respect for self include belief in your own competence, ability, and self-worth. The pinnacle of Maslow's hierarchy is self-actualization. This level represents the realization of personal potential, self-fulfillment, and the pursuit of personal growth and peak experiences. It is about becoming everything you are capable of becoming. Examples include pursuing creative activities, seeking spiritual enlightenment, and striving for personal growth and transformation. The main way in which this hierarchy is used today is in thinking about how to ensure people's needs are met in order for them to thrive and flourish. In the classroom, for example, teachers need to focus on ensuring students feel a sense of safety and sense of belonging in the classroom. With these lower needs met, the students may be able to focus on developing self-esteem and working on higher-level creativity tasks. A teacher might also observe a child misbehaving, and instead of rushing to punishment, they could reflect on which base needs are not met, which could be the base cause of the misbehavior. For example, the child may just be tired or missed breakfast. By addressing these base needs, the child's misbehavior may subside. This same mentality can be applied in the workplace, healthcare settings, and personal relationships. For more on Maslow's hierarchy, including some critiques of the
All right, so let's talk about how we can use this lens in our work and maybe in our personal lives. So, like the video said, when there's basic needs like food, rest, or comfort aren't being met, we might see people shut down or withdraw, and it's often misinterpreted as either this person is having challenging behavior if they have a disability, or maybe they're just being defiant. But in reality, it's like, hey, I'm just trying to communicate, like, I have an unmet basic need. And this is especially true for people with disabilities that don't communicate verbally. So similarly, if someone doesn't feel like they're physically or emotionally safe, they might resist change, avoid others, or cling to routines. And these behaviors often get misread as being difficult or antisocial, but really it could be signs of loneliness, fear, or maybe even past trauma. And so some questions that we could be asking if we're noticing some of these changes um, include like, have there been times recently when you felt safe or unscared? And really, when we talk about when to use these types of questions, is if you know somebody really well and you notice a change in their behavior and maybe they're not opening up whenever you ask them how they're doing. So here's some more in-depth questions that you could be asking people. So like, are there any relationships that might make you feel anxious, controlled, or hurt? If we're looking at emotional safety, um, if we're wondering if somebody likes their job, or maybe if they're in a day program, like, do you feel like it's stable? Do you like this program? Do you want to continue being involved in it? Um, when we're asking people if they feel safe in their environment, you could be asking, or is there anything about your daily living or your living space or daily routine that makes you feel uncomfortable? And one thing that you could do is like checking the environment's lighting, security, noise levels. And like I said, this is all very specific to the disability field and professionals that are supporting people with disabilities. I apologize, I forgot about this slide. I should have updated it to be a more broader general audience. So we know that people really want to feel accepted, connected, and valued in their relationships. So when we talk about these higher level needs, like the love and belonging ones, there's some ways that people might experience or express that they're having emotional distress around because they don't feel like they belong. So some things that you might see, if they feel like they don't belong, you might see withdrawal or isolation. Somebody might rarely leave the room, avoid interacting with people, express feelings of being unwanted, or maybe they're being misunderstood. And a lot of times people get labeled as they're just not interested. They don't want to have those relationships. But really, this could be a sign that somebody has a history of being rejected or feeling like they don't belong. Um, I've seen it before with some people that I've worked with that have had clingy or like really boundary pushing behaviors. So if they lack strong relationships, they might need constant reassurance or attention from people. They might test boundaries or act out emotionally, not to be manipulative, but really to try to find that connection and safety and try to figure out what that line is. I've also seen it too, where somebody who may not feel like they belong may be very distrustful or hostile because they've faced stigma or exclusion from their, staff, their neighbors, just people in their lives. And so it looks very defiant, but really this could be a protective response to previous hurt that they've experienced in the past. Um, Finally, one way that I've seen it a lot is seeking connection in unsafe ways. So if there's not enough meaningful like social opportunities, some people might form unhealthy attachments. This could be with people that take advantage of them, or through risky behaviors like drug use, alcohol use. And it's because they found somebody who is giving them that sense of identity and that attention, but really it may not be coming from a safe and good place. So what I like to tell people or tell staff that work with people with disabilities, don't assume that if somebody's acting out, it's being disrespectful. I've seen that so many times too, where it's like so-and-so did this and it's because they're disrespectful. I've literally heard disrespectful like brat being thrown about and I'm like, what are we doing here, guys? So anyway, whenever I've been in these situations, I always like to approach them with generous intent, which means assuming the best about someone's motives, even if the behavior is confusing, frustrating, or hurtful. So it doesn't mean that we're going to ignore harm or avoid holding somebody accountable if they do cross the line. It's more about starting from a place of like empathy and curiosity and openness rather than blame or defensiveness or maybe just labeling something. So instead of asking or saying, they're disrespecting me, let's look behind this reaction and say, like, are there any unmet needs here? And one resource that I absolutely love is Brene Brown, her braving inventory. And she has this really great video on her website that talks about the anatomy of trust. So she says, to be consistent, kind, and predictable because people feel safe when they know what to expect. And yeah, so I highly recommend. I think I have a link to one of her videos where she goes over this braving inventory in more depth. So I highly recommend checking that out. But basically, it's I can hold firm to my boundaries and also communicate that to you, and then you're going to respect them, and vice versa. I will also respect any boundaries. If you're not comfortable talking about a certain topic, I'm going to respect that and not push and make you talk about something that you're not wanting to. Another example is reliability, saying that you're going to do what you're going to do and actually doing it and following through. Accountability, so owning up to your mistakes. If you do offend somebody, owning up to it and saying, I'm sorry, and I'm going to do my best to make amends and actually follow through with that. Vault is a really important one. This is basically whatever I share with you will be held in confidence, because you know that the story isn't something that you should share. I approach a lot of my relationships with whatever I say, I just assume is going to be said to other people. So I try to approach it with as much kindness and empathy as possible. And if I do really need to confide in somebody and I'm like, hey, I've got some controversial opinions coming your way, I need to make sure that this is going to stay confidential between us and doesn't leave this conversation. And yeah, thankfully, most of my friends that I'm able to say that to respect that. Finally, integrity. So in choosing courage over comfort. So there's been times where I've had a friend that maybe did something that just did not sit right with me. And instead of just ignoring it and letting it fester, really just being courageous and saying, hey, like, this is what you said that really hurt my feelings. Like, can we talk about this and work through this? And it's usually ended up in a stronger relationship with friends. Yeah, and then non-judgment and generosity. So like I said, I do have a link to this video. So if you want to check that out in more depth, 10 out of 10 recommend that. So finally, let's tie all of this together with some strategies to become less ableist and approach our work with a more human-centered lens. So this can be done if we reframe just how we approach our work from like we're providing support to we're being allies. So like I said earlier, loneliness isn't just about being alone. It's sometimes people are feeling like they're misunderstood or they're excluded or they're expected to fit in rather than belong. And we know that ableism can really reinforce these feelings, which is why allyship matters. So here's some strategies that you can do to actually be an ally and disrupt ableism and create some connection. So starting with educating yourself, I mean, just showing up here today, this is a prime example of learning is being the first step. So learn about the history of disability rights, learn about the eugenics movement and intersectionality. So you can listen to podcasts, follow disabled creators, and ask yourself whose stories are missing from your world so that you can have a better perspective. We also want to resist assuming what other people need. So one of my very favorite leadership books is The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay Stanier. And the main takeaway basically is your advice isn't as good as you think it is, which was a hard thing for me to read and accept when I first read the book because I can be an advice monster, apparently, is what they coined in that book. So the same goes with allyship. We don't want to step in to fix something or speak on somebody else's behalf. We want to ask them, what does support look like to them, and empower them to, take action within their own lives. Also, we want to practice the art of listening. So true listening, when we are not being judgmental, defensive, or problem solving. This is actually considered a very radical act of connection. So people can feel like they're seen and they're heard, even in their discomfort or pain. And just being seen and heard and having that space to be able to talk things through without somebody trying to fix it for you. It's one of those things that can disrupt the isolation that ableism often causes. Also, we don't want to be putting people into boxes. So each of us hold multiple identities, whether that be through our race, our gender, our disability, our class, our culture, and more. Like allyship is really about creating these spaces that allow for the full complexity of somebody's identity without them having to simplify it or sanitize it because we feel uncomfortable about talking about some issues that people might actually be facing. And finally, recognizing that privilege is power. And I really want to highlight, I know that privilege can be a hard thing for people to swallow. So having privilege doesn't mean that you haven't worked hard to get where you're at or you haven't faced hardships in life. Basically, all of us have some form of privilege, whether it's that we are able bodied or college educated, or maybe we are neurotypical. Basically, some people's privileges add up to be greater than others, and allyship is all about using those privileges so that we do advocate for those who don't have those same advantages. So the bottom line, really, when we're being an ally, it's not being perfect. It's about showing up, staying curious, and creating environments where nobody feels invisible or left out. So at this time, does anybody have any questions for me? Hopefully I didn't go too fast. I tend to be a really fast talker, and I always catch myself at like the end of the presentation that I was talking too fast.
Do you have any advice about resources for families when there are big changes in the family?
Yes, I have lots of resources. What kind of big changes are we talking? Like within
Deteriorating a brain.
okay, so like aging and
Like what?
like aging.
No, it's a childhood injury that's just, it's always been there, but now it's suddenly much worse. So,
Oh, gotcha, gotcha. So it sounds like it was a TBI type of injury.
yes,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah.
So there are brain injury networks. I know of one in North Dakota. I'm assuming that Minnesota has a chapter. They would be a great resource for specific TBI. I actually just listened to a really great webinar about TBI, but I mean, it was more about raising awareness about the impacts of it. But there's some great advocacy groups like Family Voices. They have chapters throughout all the different states, and those are really great resource hubs that can connect people to different agencies that specialize and provide different strategies, especially specific to Minnesota, assuming that's where you're from.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Yeah,
That's
I will throw
wonderful.
these in the chat right now because I am really good at Googling things.
Just to follow up on that, there is the Brain Injury Association of Minnesota, which provides a lot of the resources for individuals with brain injuries of a wide variety.
Yeah, I was really surprised because I worked with somebody who was pretty young and they had a stroke. And at the time, so the definition of brain injury varies state by state. So we actually weren't able to access the brain injury network for that person because at the time, a stroke wasn't considered a brain injury. But thankfully, I think it was like 2 years afterwards, the North Dakota legislator added stroke and a couple other things to the definition so that people were able to actually get resources for it.
And Krista, if you would like, we could put together a sheet of resources that we could put out on the website.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe we'll do that as a follow-up, resources for people, who are dealing with, both resources for people who are dealing with somebody in their family or their lives that have disabilities and how to, cope, work with them, whatever. But also, I think, resources for advocacy, that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
let's talk about that. My question for you is, you talked about how we can personally think differently about people with disabilities, how we can stop, sort of pigeonholing them as somebody who is less than or has a problem, and start thinking of them more as people who are just have different abilities than we do, but that it's not necessarily less than or worse, right?
Right.
And how do we, so you've talked a lot about how we as individuals kind of focus on that and kind of shift our thinking. It's a really hard thing to do, so I'm not trying to minimize that. It's difficult to kind of wrap your head around this idea of shifting the whole way you've understood people with disabilities. But What else might we do in our communities to shift the narrative on a larger scale? So how do we shift our culture? What can we do in our communities to kind of make them more friendly to people with disabilities? What sorts of things might we actions might we take?
I like that callback. And also, I was really proud of myself because I unintentionally used taking action at one point in the presentation. Um, Honestly, right now, I feel like we're in this point where we're seeing the pendulum swinging backwards, where we're going to have to fight to keep some of the basic things that have been achieved throughout the years. So I just saw that the current administration is wanting to roll back on 504 accommodations like curb cuts and elevators and some of these basic universal design things like door openers. So I guess starting with contacting your representatives, which I know is really annoying because we're always told that and it gets exhausting. But really like putting up a fight for some of these things that we've had in place for a long time that people are trying to dismantle, it would be one thing. Another thing is just if you, like I said, I don't know exactly like what everybody does with this group. Like I said, I'm usually used to working with professionals that support people with disabilities. But if you are involved with like putting together training series or just anything, bringing people with disabilities to the table, making sure that they're involved and helping them prepare. So like if you are on a board, like do you know somebody with a disability that maybe would have some really great insight and be a good person to include on that board or maybe an advisory committee? So just really bringing people to the table and like letting people know about these different groups, because I think that that's an issue with a lot of the people that we work with or that I work with, is they're just very disconnected from a lot of these social groups and places where they can get involved.
So
Just to
that, so,
follow,
oh, go ahead, Steve.
just to follow up on some of the ideas that have been brought up here, as far as including people with disabilities in the community, in Minnesota at least, we have robust funding to help support people with disabilities in their communities. And it's mainly funded through Medicaid. And so one of the things I'm spending a lot of time on right now is advocating for Medicaid and contacting legislators at the national level about that. And that's very important because that provides the resources so people can live in the community by themselves or whatever. And so that's an important one. I just wanted to share one concept that was brand new in the past week or two to my wife and I, and that was that the term care partner rather than caregiver. And when you speak of allies, caregiving to me has always been an uncomfortable term because even though I have many physical needs that I need help with from other people, I don't feel like a patient or whatever. And so my wife, after my stroke, came up with the term that we're a team, and the same concept is that we're care partners. We help each other in a variety of ways. It's not just a one-way street, and that's part of the way I think that we have to look at when we associate with people with disabilities are going to be an ally. It benefits both people. It doesn't just benefit the person with disabilities. And so I think that's an important thing to think about.
Yeah, I really appreciate that because that's wonderful. My nana, she's had a fall and then experienced a brain bleed and now is disabled because of that fall. And so I've heard her say so many times, I feel like such a burden on everybody because now we basically we take care of her 24/7. So we've hired a bunch of staff to come in and help, and we've always called them caregivers, but I really prefer that whole care partner because um yeah, like she still has plenty of value. We love to hear her perspective on things, and yeah, I wish I would have heard that term 2 years ago, honestly, Steve.
Mhm. Well, I just heard it 2 weeks ago. So
Yeah.
So going back to the contacting, it's great to contact federal legislators. Definitely, we want to keep Medicaid. It'd be such a shame if that it harms so many people if that goes away. definitely we want to make sure that our state disability rights stay strong and that those services stay there. What about at the city or the county level? Is there things we could be doing there?
I mean, there's so many disability agencies out there. There's Centers for Independent Living. Those are great partners to bring to the table. So if there is a new business, like maybe you know of a new business and you have some connections to people that might be starting it up, hey, how about you reach out to this group because they specialize in disability or accessibility, so that you can take care of some of this stuff on the front end and not have to try to build it in. That's often what we see is like, oh, let's build a platform or a new business, and then like 5 years down the road somebody's coming up and saying, hey, could you put an automatic door opener? And it's so much harder to retrofit it. So I think in our communities, just connecting people to these different resources of people that have that expertise, so that that voice is at that table. um
Mhm. Yeah, I'm just thinking about Steve-O's comment about the door openers at Culver's. So, a campaign talking, writing to Culver's saying, we want door openers, this is not fair. And something along that line might be a really powerful local action someone could take.
Yeah, for sure.
I think one of the points that you guys are making is to get involved with buildings and stuff while they're being built. And a prime example of that is the Minnesota Twins and the Viking Stadium. They did welcome disability advocates to the board, or as far as the planning goes, and I think both facilities have been um, acknowledged as being very accessible. And so that's a part where we need to get to. And I'm not sure how to get to that when you see a new building going up or a new restaurant or whatever. I mean, they just built the new Panera Breads in Monticello, and again, I can't get in it by myself.
Hmm. I thought it was mandated that people had to put those in, but apparently not.
No, if the doors can, well, my wife is an expert on that, but I can't. But there's certain pounds pressure on a door that they don't have to do it. For me, it's
Well,
turning the thing around. It's not a special thing for people with disabilities. It's a good business practice. And that's where we need to get, is that it's a good business practice and it's good for all of us. So
mhm.
um, until we get there, we're going to continue to have these problems.
Yeah, and I think that really reframing the conversation around like this helps everybody. And I
Yeah.
think people might get sticker shock sometimes with some of the accessibility features. Like I think that the last time I checked, automatic door openers were around $5,000, and that was a long time ago. So they might be even more nowadays. And I mean, yeah, if you're starting a new business, that could be like, okay, if I go with that, now I can't afford, X, Y, and Z. But really, it's like this is going to bring you in more revenue. If you are working with people that appreciate the economic frames of things, yeah, the more people that can access your business, the better business you're going to have.
And the bigger stores like Target, Cub, whatever, Walmart, they have those doors. And so they've already incorporated it as a business practice in order to give more accessibility to everyone. So yeah, that's something we all have to think about and how we can reframe that and make that more natural and
Mhm.
hopefully keep the regulations in place and
Yeah.
strengthen them.
So it's striking me that one of the things we could do too is to understand what helps people, what kind of changes we can make to our built environment is one thing that will help people. It's difficult because there's all sorts of disabilities, right? And sometimes what one person with a disability needs is in contradiction to what another person needs. Um, and so educating ourselves on the different built environment changes that we could advocate for and how come they help. Um, but beyond built environment, there must be other places too that we should be thinking about.
Yeah, honestly, perspective taking is really like an eye-opening thing. So here is a list of a lot of my favorite disability advocates. And they have a ton of like social media content. And every time I've watched these folks and watched their content, I'm just blown away because I'm like, okay, I never thought of something in this way. I see a hand up.
Hi, this is Jane. We have a friend who's not only physically disabled, but getting back to this loneliness piece, I'm texting her back and forth. She's 23 years old and is very active in the community, but she drove out to Niagara Falls, New York to be with her family. And I was puzzled by that. So I was texting her and asking her, well, what family are you referring to? And she referenced her disease, which is a degenerative disease, and sent me a fact sheet. And I thought, oh my goodness, I've known this young woman for 6 years or more, and I've never really investigated what her disease is. And so she sent me this fact sheet, and that's kind of a beginning phase. But I just had your presentation tonight really tapped into that loneliness thing and how she drove across country to go be with what she considers her family, which is other people with this particular this degenerative disease. It's called XLH, and it's very, very uncommon, but she has the genes. So thank you for this. I really it helps me to understand a little more how much farther I need to go and help, not helping her, but for me to how she's helping me to understand by sharing these intimate details of her life. So just wanted to thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And actually, a lot of with my platform, I'm always trying to bring people with disabilities in as speakers, and some of the things that they've shared is just that importance of having connection with other people that have those same experiences. So yeah, like driving across country, I've heard of many people doing that because like nobody really understands until they understand, if that makes sense. Like I always share with people, like I've never understood grief until I really experienced true grief. And yeah, I would have given anything at that point in my life to have somebody else to lean on that had gone through a similar experience as me.
What I think I'm going to do right now, I had put in the chat the taking action, the evaluation form link. So if you could please make sure you do that. But I'm also putting in here some questions for you to think about. So what resonated with you about this topic? How might you take action in your local community to help people with disabilities? And what more would you like to learn? And I think what I'm going to do is break us into 2 breakout groups and give you guys a chance to, I think the breakout rooms kind of shift the dynamic a little and give us an opportunity to talk more, process a little and talk more with each other about things we can do.
Out there, do you want
Um,
participate?
so I'm going to put you into
room?
breakout rooms, and then we'll do that for like 10 minutes and then come back. Does that sound good to everyone?
We're unmuted though.
Yes, you're unmuted. We can hear you.
Sorry.
That's okay.
You can hear him.
So
Yeah.
I'm gonna go ahead and set up those breakout rooms, and we'll do that for about 10 minutes. And please introduce yourselves and share with each other what what brought you to the meeting, and then you can talk about some of these questions. So let me see. First, I'm gonna stop the recording because we don't need it to be recorded anymore. Okay.